G'day, George Russell with his second ever F1 win at the Austrian Grand Prix. Let me tell you what happened post-race with George. What a stunning surprise victory for George Russell. The first I knew about it, I was waiting to go out to Parc Ferme, standing with a whole lot of other photographers, and then suddenly these guys start shouting because somebody had a screen, and on lap 64, as you knew, there was an incident between Max and Lando that put them out of contention. And I've got to say, at that point, there were very few photographers left out on track. Everybody pretty much is making their way back for the Parc Ferme celebrations. At that point, I'm thinking, wow, we are going to get a stunning podium, given that there are three drivers up there who normally aren't there. So the race finishers were allowed out into the Parc Ferme area, and suddenly I see that all the Mercedes crew have got there before us. That's unusual. That means we have to take a second row spot. George rolls up in his car, gets out and does his now familiar T-pose. Jumps down from the car and then runs to his crew, which are to the left of me, and soaks up their love for a couple of seconds before heading back to take his helmet off. And then I look to the right and I see Toto Wolff. He's on the phone at that point. I'm going to guess he was on the phone to his wife at that point. When he hung up, I just said to him, "How does that feel?" And he said, "Well, it's been such a long time." And it had. It was 2022. When George was the last Mercedes driver to win a race. That was in Brazil, and I was there for that moment too, when he clearly had tears in his eyes. I remember Lando coming over and congratulating him. After that was up to the podium for the obligatory spraying of the bubbly. After the bubbly spraying and the group photo, it was down to the TV media pen. I headed back to edit some photos and then headed to the last few minutes of the press conference, where there were very few journalists in there and I was the only photographer. One thing I do remember in terms of George's response was when asked about celebrating the event, he responded, "I want to celebrate it because you can't take these moments for granted. You need to enjoy it, but it won't be as hard as Lando's celebration. If it's 50% as hard as Lando's celebration, it will be a pretty massive night." I wonder now, the day after, whether it was a massive night for him. Then it was a long walk back underneath the track to the front of the garage for the post-race celebration shot. Now, at that time, there were a lot of trucks coming down pit lane because all the teams want to pack up their gear. The celebration shot actually necessitated them stopping a number of those trucks so that this could be done. George arrived. Lewis was also there. He actually gave Nicky Lauda's wife, Birgit, a hug and sat with her for the celebrations. He did sit on the edge, though, making for a quick getaway because he was in his good trousers that he wore earlier into the track. And once all the photographers and the team were set up, there was one dry celebration shot and then a wet one, after which the bubbly was opened and sprayed everywhere. And of course, George and Toto get another dousing. And when I was looking at some photos for this video, it was the first time I've actually looked at the label on these bottles. And each of these labels is actually made for the race. You can see here, although a little bit fuzzy, that it's got the Austria race and the date of the event. And those bottles are indeed great keepsakes, and you'll see a picture later of George leaving with that bottle. And as usual, once the drivers get up and move away from the group, media rushes in and it is a crush. And look, I'm a big guy and I've still got to work hard to keep my position. I was at the front, and as you can see, it stings the eyes, and I notice this all the time. These poor drivers, once they get the first lot in their eyes are closed. They can't see what's going on. He was then hoisted up on one of the crew's shoulders for these shots, and before he went and hugged almost everybody in his team, he went over to Ted Kravitz and doused Ted in champagne as well, which I thought was lovely, and Ted was pretty good-natured about it. A couple of minutes later, I found George and Ted talking, and off camera, George is saying, "Look, I'm sorry about that. Do you want to use my shower to get clean?" He said, "No, that's fine. I've got a T-shirt underneath it." And later on, I actually caught Ted out in the paddock with this rather unusual pose. But he was certainly good-natured about it. And I think he was more than delighted to be doused in that bubbly by an F1 race winner. After that, he went back to the motorhome to have a shower and clean up before his flight back home. And this was my final picture of him leaving the track. Now, if we go back to the Saturday press conference, he was asked what he thought the situation would be like for Sunday's race. And his comment was great, where he said, "Look, I'm probably just going to sit back and let these other two fight it out." And as you know, that's exactly what transpired. Is this good for Formula One? You bet. Suddenly now we've got the opportunity for other drivers to win because we've got a rivalry up the front with Max and Lando. And you might have heard Lando say afterwards that when asked about will it affect their relationship, because they are good friends, he virtually said if Max doesn't take responsibility for this, it's going to be very tough for them to have that friendship. And what did Max say when he was asked about the incident? Non-committal. He needed to look at the vision before he made a comment. One thing's for sure, this will be a talking point this week and into the upcoming race weekend, in Britain, where Lando Norris will, of course, be a crowd favourite. As Lando was leaving last night, David Valsecchi was doing a bit on the Grid podcast, stopped his podcasting to give Lando some positive words of encouragement as he left the track. As I did, and I've got to say that's one of the best times to catch drivers because there's no other photographers around, there's no TV, it's very quiet, the drivers can often stand there for some time and you get a few seconds with them. Let's go to the second place getter, Oscar Piastri. He was looking like dipping out on a podium, but of course the two top drivers crashing out meant that he was elevated to second. He had a celebration shot afterwards out the front of the McLaren garage, and McLaren do their celebrations a whole lot differently. There is no Red Bull, there's no bubbly wine, there's no liquid at all, so all of those guys end up getting out of there scot-free. They don't have to go and have a shower, they don't have to wash their clothes. They're free to go. And it was good to see Lando Norris also celebrating with Oscar for the second place finish. Front and centre with him, enjoying a lollipop. Last year, it was very rare for Max Verstappen to come out of the FIA garage. I think it was once. This year, though, he's missed the podium on 3 occasions, and this was him coming out of that FIA garage on Sunday. Others exiting, Daniel Ricciardo, happy with his performance. He scored points, finished in front of his teammate, which is vital for him, given that he's up against Liam Lawson for that seat at VCARB, and I'll get to Liam in just a second. Nico Hülkenberg, he was pretty excited because he finished 6th. With Kevin Magnussen a couple of places behind. But that's valuable points for the Haas team. Lance Stroll also smiling, not in the points, but still happy enough to give us a big grin. Can't tell what Lewis Hamilton was thinking because he, as he often does when he comes out of that FIA garage, comes out with his helmet on. We don't get any read on his emotions at that time. Now, other stuff over the weekend you might find interesting. Go back to Daniel Ricciardo. When he came in the morning, he was wearing a local Austrian hat. Not the only one to wear that hat. I see Pierre Gasly also wore it on the drivers' parade. But as Daniel walked underneath the track through this corridor, I didn't have any idea that he had this in his pocket, but he's produced a knife and shown it to me, which had, for me, definite Crocodile Dundee overtones, and he was smiling about it. And I mentioned Liam Lawson before too in that VCARB duel for the seat. I caught him walking down the paddock with one of his crew wheeling along this luggage, which is part of his sponsorship duties. It didn't even have his name on the case. This one was Yuki's, but he's doing the right thing for the team. He probably didn't know this, but at the track, the announcers were making regular comments about it is illegal to let off flares. Do not let off flares. You'll be done by the police and you'll get banned by the circuit. Well, I did see post-race, just behind the podium, a flare go off. In fact, I didn't see it first. I smelt it. That's a rancid smell. I don't know why people love them. But anyway, I imagine that person would be pretty easy to spot and probably got themselves a ban. Did we have any celebrities? Yes, we had Hans Zimmer, who is a notable composer, and George Lucas, film producer, Star Wars fame. It's raining quite heavily now, but luckily I'm under a tree. On the weekend, I lost this little pouch, which has in it some custom-made earphones and 2 very expensive memory cards. Well, I am so delighted that Christian Goodall actually found it near the back of the Aston Martin garage, opened it up, and because something had my name on it, actually sent me an email. Thank you, because that's worth quite a lot of money. And when I look back at the stuff I've lost, and I've lost a fair bit, most of the time people find it and return it. So thank you, Christian. Now, did we have any girlfriends or family members here this weekend? Yes, Carlos Sainz had his dad there, Carlos Sainz. Pierre Gasly's mum, Pascal, was in attendance. Oscar Piastri's dad, Chris, was there. Sebastian Vettel's dad, Norbert, also in attendance, along with Mick Schumacher's mum, Corinna. Let's talk about the green carpet. It's similar to the Melbourne Walk, where drivers will walk along the crowd, stop and sign a few autographs, have a chat with an interviewer. Not quite as big as the Melbourne Walk in terms of length, but they do spend some time on it. Probably the longest was Oscar Piastri. Not all drivers do it. Regularly there's a handful that just bypass it for one reason or another, but for the fans who get there as early as 5 a.m, it's a real thrill to be up front and see their heroes. Now, with that said, and the rain getting heavier, it's your time now to please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. And for a whole lot of extra content and merchandise, look here. Thanks for watching and stay passionate. I might need a towel too. It's so wet. Jeez, I'm getting wet.